Welcome to Small Business, Big Network, the podcast for small business owners who want big results from their networking. I'm Liz Drury, a freelance voiceover artist who knows that if you're not working, then networking could help. Mateo Martez is the author of Beyond Networking, Become the Person Everyone Wants to Know. As you might expect, he's got lots of great tips for networking. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, Mateo.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm so glad to be here.
Now, you are seemingly the perfect guest for this podcast because you are best-selling author of Beyond Networking, Become the Person Everyone Wants to Know. And of course, we all want to know how to become that person. So I'm really excited to talk to you. But before we talk about your book, I'd love to talk a bit about your background first and how you came to be this person that you are today. So tell me about how high school was for you and what you did just beyond that.
Of course. First caveat, Beyond Networking is not a bestseller, not yet. It's very, very popular among the people who have read it, but not quite that famous. No, my journey has been one that has been very abnormal, to say the least. I spent a lot of time in high school, to be honest, being someone who loved people but wasn't always loved by people. I very much was someone who was very extroverted and wanted to connect with people, but wasn't always the most socially attuned, so sometimes I do things that were a little bit socially awkward, etc. And you could kind of feel someone not respond well to that, but I couldn't figure out how to solve that.
Yeah.
So I spent a while actually studying these people. There's this really fantastic book and YouTube channel called Charisma on Command. And I spent a while basically learning about how to become a better communicator, because one of the things that's really cool about communication in general is when someone is a good communicator, you just think, oh, they just have it. They just have this magic. But when you actually understand communication, you realize there are a million little things you can do that change how you are perceived.
Yeah.
So, for example, using fewer filler words, right? Or speaking in a more variety in terms of your tone of voice. Or if you're talking to someone face-to-face, better eye contact. And all these things are things that people don't pick up on. Wow, Mateo's using really good eye contact. Or, wow, Mateo has few filler words. They just pick up on how they feel. They say, I feel so engaged when I talk to you. Or they say, you're so articulate. And so for me, it was this really beautiful transformation of getting to see myself go from someone who was pretty uncomfortable socially in the sense that I love people, but I couldn't seem to figure out how to get people to like me, to someone who by the end of high school and into university was very much doing a lot of coaching to help high school and college students improve their communication skills.
Yeah. So how long did that process take, to take yourself from being, I think you describe it as being from awkward to engaging?
Yeah, I mean, that took about probably the time where I was most focused on it was for about 18 months. What I highly recommend for anyone who, if you listen to podcasts, if you read books, whatever it may be, I think it can be easy to fall into almost like an information trap where you're just learning so much, but you're not using what you learn.
Yeah.
And so I was very deliberate to go, okay, I want to be really good at this. How do I become someone who, okay, I'm watching one video and, these Charisma on Command videos are super fascinating. They have 6 or 7 points that you can take away. I was like, I can't do 6 or 7 things. We're going to focus on one. And so I would focus on, let me use more expansive gestures when I talk to people. Let me make better eye contact. And I would just focus on that one habit for 2 to 3 weeks until it became pretty automatic, at which point I would go back and watch a new video and then continue the process from there. So that very much was the journey, was this 18-month stretch of me just every couple of weeks adding a new thing. And over that course of time, I saw myself go from someone who, I like people, they didn't like me, to the point where I like people and they loved me, which is a great thing to have just personally and really, really enjoyable in all my conversations.
Yeah. So tell me what you went on and did after high school.
Yeah. I went to the University of Alabama, so Roll Tide. In the U.S., it's like a big football school and whatnot. And I went there in part because of my networking skills. I had discovered how to basically reach out to people via cold outreach and get on Zoom calls with people I thought were interesting. And then once I got on these Zoom calls, because I had developed some of these charisma skills where I had become someone who people really enjoyed talking to, I would frequently talk to people and they'd be like, oh, you remind me of this student, or you should meet this professor, you should da-da-da-da-da. And so over the course of my time in high school, I wound up having like over 40 Zoom calls with people from the University of Alabama to go ahead and meet them. And basically by the time I got to the school, it felt like I already kind of had a home base, a home turf. And during my time there, I had a great time. I really built lots of meaningful relationships, lots of friendships that are still really near and dear to me. And I think I also was able to, more than perhaps most students, leverage some of the different resources that the university offers in terms of access to mentors and otherwise, because of some of the communication networking skills I taught myself.
Yeah. So when did you write the book and how long did it take you to write it?
Yeah. I spent 2 years writing this book. I have a friend who says that he only wrote his book because he could not write his book, and I feel similarly about my book. Like, I had to write this. I came across this guy named Jason Gaynard, not very famous himself, but he's behind a lot of things that a lot of people would recognize. For example, he is the guy who introduced James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, to Ryan Holiday before James Clear had ever written a book.
Right.
And apparently in 10 minutes, Ryan Holiday convinced James Clear to write a book, which became Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
So Jason's this behind-the-scenes guy who's having a huge impact in a lot of ways, but that people don't really see him. He's behind the scenes. So I came across him because he'd written this 2015 book called Mastermind Dinners that was really useful. It taught me how to host really good dinners. And I was like, this guy's brilliant. Has he made anything else? And so I discovered he, in 2018, created a podcast called Community Made. And I became obsessed with this podcast. One of the things I was doing toward the end of high school and into university is I was coaching high school and college students on how to improve their time management and networking skills. And so I'd read and was familiar with most of the things in the space. And I came across this podcast and was just like, this is 10 times better than anything else that's out there. So I became determined to take that thinking and really consolidate it into this tight 100-page book that is Beyond Networking. I based it on, there's this famous book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, written by this guy, Eric Jorgensen. He took all of Naval's thinking and combined it into a book. And I was like, I want to do that with Jason. And so I did. It took me about 2 years. And the book is something I'm incredibly proud of, and it came out this April.
Yeah. And who did you write the book for?
I joke because I think I have three answers to this question. The first one is I wrote it for myself.
Yeah.
In that I came across Jason's thinking and was like, he is someone who thinks about the world the exact same way I approach the world, but he's had 20 more years of experience doing these things. And so I want to learn how to approach the world as he does, because he approaches the world from such a place of authenticity and intentionality and generosity in a way that I really aspire to. So that was very much I was the first audience. I was like, okay, I really want to internalize his thinking, and that worked very well. Like, I can't imagine thinking about the world without his thinking kind of seeded into my own. The second was a lot of my friends. I am around a lot of really bright, ambitious young entrepreneurs, young professionals, people who have aspirations to do really meaningful things with their lives, to create some significant change in the world. And I saw so many of them have this aversion to relationship building or to networking. We tend to get this idea that networking is this terribly transactional, here's my business card, or I do you a favor, you do me a favor. And that just wasn't my experience from the relationships I built, from the people I looked to, like Jason. They're just these incredibly generous givers who, by giving so much, end up being supported by so many people and get to do these incredible opportunities, like getting to link someone like James Clear to Ryan Holiday, which obviously impacts millions of people.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to kind of destigmatize and de-stress the process of networking. I always tell people networking is building meaningful relationships with interesting people. And I'm like, that's called making friends. You've been doing this since you were 5. Like, it's not rocket science, it's not crazy, but it's one of those things that if you can just relax and really lean into it, you'll have a great time and, frankly, a much richer life in terms of the lived experience you have. And then thirdly, my audience was actually Jason. I became very, very obsessed with his thinking and was like, this is someone who I think would be a dream mentor for me. And so what was cool is, because his whole thing is about relationship building, I was, over the course of 2 years, able to slowly get to know him using the exact same things he talks about as really important to relationship building, to build a relationship with him. And he has very much become a mentor and someone who I'm very honored to have in my life.
Yeah, yeah. And so is the book just for people who are in business, or is it more than that?
Yeah, I love the cover blurb that one of my friends very graciously wrote. Jeff wrote this thing that basically, this is a shortcut to life's most important skills, not just for business, but for living well. And I think that is a really true sentiment, that the ideas in the book, they are definitely professionally oriented, right? This isn't a book on dating. This isn't a book on strictly on friendship. I do think the line between like professional networking and friendship, to me, is incredibly blurred. Like, all of my friends are my network, and all of my network are my friends. This kind of goes both ways. But I think that's the way I frame it. So it's very much something that is most helpful if you are someone who is looking to build stronger relationships in business and also understand how those relationships can impact your business. But at the same time, if you apply these same principles in your relationships just generally, you will find yourself much more connected to people and enjoying your conversations a lot more.
Yeah, yeah. And what things do you see people getting wrong when it comes to networking, particularly in a business sense?
Totally. I think one of the biggest challenges with networking is so often we take it transactionally, right? This sort of kind of gets this bad rap or this bad reputation. And we fixate on, what can I get from like Liz? Like, what can I get from Liz tomorrow, right? As opposed to, okay, Liz is someone who's interesting. I hope I get to know her over the course of decades. right? And trusting that this relationship will just be one that is fruitful, as all relationships tend to be, right? Because, you may come across something and be like, Mateo, you should be on this podcast, or I may come across something and be, Liz, this would be a fantastic guest, right? And that's not something that I know right now, but in 5 years, I could still come across someone and be like, wait, this would be a fantastic opportunity, or I think you'd love this article, or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that people get wrong a lot is they fixate on the benefit of the relationship today as opposed to the benefit of the relationship over a lifetime. And that frame, that short-term frame, is something that very much restricts the value you can actually get out of a relationship, right? Because I would point to, I have this friend, for example, Bobby, who I first met because I thought he was just doing some really interesting things in the entrepreneurship scene and the young entrepreneurship scene. And we became friends. He wound up inviting me to a conference he ran. And then I wound up meeting a guy who invited me to move to Boston. It's like the way I wound up living in Boston, and context, I live in like a hacker house with a lot of startup founders from Harvard and MIT, which is super cool. And frankly, sometimes like a reality TV show. It's like this whole opportunity came out of this friendship with Bobby. But when I met Bobby, I had no idea that any of these things were going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what can be difficult is you may be networking because you're trying to, find someone you want to hire, you're trying to close like some business development or whatever it may be. And these things are important, and there are urgent deadlines with that. But to focus solely on the things that are going to matter in the next quarter or even the next year is to lose out on a lot of the long-term value of relationships and networking.
Yeah. So why would you say that it's important to be good at networking, and what difference does it make to someone's life to be good at networking?
Yeah. One of my frames through which I operate in terms of how I move through the world comes from, I think it's a 1997 Jeff Bezos shareholder letter, but he says that business is like baseball, right? In that in baseball, you can score 1, 2, 3, or 4 runs, but that in business, every now and again, you can score 1,000 runs. He makes this point that if you have a 10% chance at a 100 times return, you should take that bet every single time, but you should still be prepared to fail 9 times out of 10. And I really like that frame because I think most people either undervalue risk of they're like, well, I don't want to take any risk. And so they wouldn't take that 10% chance at a 100 times return. Or they go, well, it kind of have this huge return, so I'm going to over-index on that. And they actually sacrifice their ability to survive the risks that don't go well. And what I think is really beautiful about relationship building and networking is not only is it something that's incredibly fulfilling in terms of the quality of your relationships, but it also increases your luck surface area, which is basically your chances of getting some of these big returns, right? It's like none of them are guaranteed, but if they were to happen, could change your life.
Yeah.
I, for example, sent a cold email. I mailed a copy of my book to Canada, which was more expensive than I expected it to be. And I sent a really good cold email as well with that. And it was like this tiny, tiny chance of this thing working. And I constantly do experiments like this. And I was pitching a really interesting entrepreneur to be part of his conference. And through a series of things, this wound up happening. I wound up going to this conference. That's where I met my now boss, who I work for as a chief of staff. And it's like a million ripple effects from this thing, right? It was probably like a less than 1% chance of success, but it's had this huge payoff in terms of the shape of my life to now, and I'm sure will continue to ripple for decades to come. And I think that is the value of relationship building, right? It's like you're able to have a lot of relationships that increase your chances of having some of these really lucky opportunities come across your plate, and they also give you the confidence to be the kind of person who can reach out for a big opportunity because you go, well, I've had X, Y, and Z things, right? I would never reach out to this famous entrepreneur if I hadn't had all the conversations I'd had in high school and university, talking to people and realizing, oh, I could just reach out to this person, we can have a Zoom call. Oh, I could reach out to this person and ask to be part of their conference, right? So you build this level of trust in yourself and trust in your ability to build relationships as a result of the past experience doing it, right?
Yeah. So tell me about your networking activities now. How do you continue to grow your network?
Yeah. One of my favorite ways to build relationships, I'm at a point in my life where I'm not doing as much cold outreach as I once was. I find generally if I want to meet someone, usually I know someone who can refer me in, which is really, really lovely, because it's just a lot easier, to be honest, right? Because there's shared trust in both relationships. So that trust extends to me from the new person, which is really, really helpful. But I will say, one of my favorite things that I continue to do is this thing called a no reply needed email. A lot of people, when they think about cold outreach, usually if you're doing cold outreach, there's some sort of ask, right? Can I volunteer at your conference? Can I book a sales call with you? Whatever it may be, right? But the thing for me is that that's not how we start a lot of our relationships, right? You don't usually meet someone casually and go, oh, like, can you do this favor for me, right? You're much more likely to just like get to know the person. And so what's cool is there are enough ways now with technology, right? Podcasts, YouTube videos, books, whatever it may be, that most people are leaving a a breadcrumb or a trail, even social media, of who they are, what they're thinking about, what they care about. And so what I will frequently do is I will frequently come across someone who I think is really interesting. And if they mention something in a podcast that makes me think of, oh, this makes me think of this other article I've read, I go ahead and send them an email. I find their email. I literally in the subject write, no reply needed, and then some sort of catchy subject line that grabs their attention. And then I send them a very short email just saying like, hi, so-and-so, heard your thoughts here, made me think of this, here's my takeaway. No reply needed, but hope this helps, right? And what this does is it allows me to build a relationship digitally, starting with a connection point and starting with a give, right? There's no ask. It's just literally like, there's no need to even reply. I just wanted to share this thing and be helpful. And what I found is really, really beautiful with this is if you do this a couple times, usually first off, people are like, who are you? Why are you just helping me for no reason? So there's this immediate desire to like get to know you, right? Because we all have this kind of like reciprocity aspect of humans. But on top of that, there's also this whole dimension of, relationships are built through this kind of deepening of trust and showing like, okay, here's the thing that's supported. Here's the thing that's supported. Here's a small curiosity I have of like, what would you recommend I read in the space? And here's another thing of give, right? And you're able to start building this relationship with people who, I don't know, like are people who I think if I just reach out to cold with an ask would never reply. But through this process, they've become, are starting to become and will continue to become friends. So that's one thing I really enjoy doing. The other thing I do a lot of is I host a lot of dinners. I really at some point realized that I'm really good at relationships one-on-one, right? A one-on-one conversation like this, Liz. But I found that so often I would have people who I thought were really cool and I'd introduce them. And I was like, this is a lot of work. It's a lot of time and energy to do really good introductions, which I still do. But I was like, how do I start just overlapping things? So I started overlapping meetings where it's like, one meeting ends 10 minutes after the next one starts so that the two people just meet briefly, or in particular dinners, right? So I started hosting these about 8-person dinners that I just bring together a group of friends. There's this idea in the book of uncommon commonalities. So all human relationships have to go through the same stages of trust building and vulnerability building, but it happens a lot faster when you have an uncommon thing in common. You've probably experienced this. If you meet someone from your hometown in your hometown, you're kind of like, duh, we're in my hometown. Like, this is a common commonality. But if you met someone from your hometown on the other side of the world, you'd be like, whoa, why are you here? Like, let's grab beer, let's grab coffee, let's grab tea. There's immediate desire to connect because you have this uncommon thing in common. And so when I host these dinners, I often host them around, maybe not everyone there has an uncommon commonality. Sometimes that's the case. But oftentimes, at least I try to seat someone next to someone else they have an uncommon commonality with, right? So for example, 2 university students who may be both running, 7-figure businesses. It's like, okay, these are both an extremely abnormal group of people who are like, okay, they're both running these very successful companies, but they're also in university. Like, how many other people do they meet like that, right? And so they're able to have this immediate point of connection and trust because of this uncommon thing they have in common. So those are some of the things I love to do. I love to do no reply needed emails, and I love to host dinners because they allow you to kind of create a number of relationship opportunities, not for yourself, but just like connecting people who ought to know each other at the same time.
Yeah. So have you got any tips that you can give to people who are maybe just starting out on their networking journey?
Yeah. I think the first thing I would do is start getting comfortable talking to people. It is incredibly, I think, it's hard. We live in a generation that like we've all, the access to technology has in some ways stilted and stunted our growth in terms of how we communicate with one another. And I remember when I was first doing the Charisma on Command stuff and first learning to become a good communicator, you do it in very low stakes situations at first, right? You don't go into, a long-term friendship and try to like dramatically reshape how you communicate with them. You just start with like, okay, I'm going through the checkout line at the grocery store. Let me see if I can make the cashier laugh today, right? Or I just met a new person. Let me be really deliberate to ask a good question that gets them to tell a story, right? It's all these little things in these low stakes situations that, if you try to make the person at the grocery store laugh and they don't, okay, it's like 2 seconds of social embarrassment and life goes on, right? You're never going to see that person again, most likely. Whereas if you are trying to do this immediately in your deepest relationships, it's like, okay, that can come with a little bit more friction. So that I would say is the first thing, is just practice being a little bit more. There's the idea of like just being 10% more, right? If you walk into a room and everyone's whispering, right? You can just bring the volume up a little bit and suddenly you're the most interesting person in the room. Not in the sense that you're most interesting, but like people gravitate toward you because of the energy level that you bring. And so same thing in most people's day-to-day life, I think we tend to go through life very routinely, right? We get into habits. We're really good at habits, but sometimes these habits aren't constructive or building for us. And so someone may just get very into routine of, well, I go here and I do this and I, et cetera. And I think if you can just be a little spark of life in there, like there's no gain, there's no benefit of networking of like, oh, I got this thing. It's just like, you just added a little bit more joy to the world and it cost you nothing, right? They smiled, you smiled, and then you kind of both have this reinforcing narrative like, I'm happy, the world's a good place, whatever it may be, that allows you to be someone who is just continuously more enthusiastic and more positive and able to create more good in the world. I think once you're doing that kind of stuff, like once you're at a level of feeling pretty comfortable socially, the other thing I would recommend is just start reaching out to people you think would be really interesting to meet. I think people often go like, well, let me go reach out to this really famous person. And I'm like, okay, well, it's going to be a lot harder to reach someone who has, 500,000 subscribers to their YouTube channel. But maybe there's someone whose blog you read, right? I don't know if anyone reads Substack, but like if you're reading on Substack, okay, if you like someone's article and it has like 10 likes, you can probably email them, right? You can find their email pretty easily through the Substack or online, or you can possibly even reply if it's like they send it to you as a newsletter. And you just comment on the thing you read, right? Allow yourself to start just kind of creating these planted seeds, these starts of relationships. Because oftentimes, if you do a couple of these, someone will reach back out, or you can initiate and say like, hey, like I really enjoyed this, would love to talk about this, and then you hop on a Zoom call or whatever it may be. But I think those would be the two things: are one, start getting comfortable socially by just putting yourself in low stakes situations where you can practice, and two, at the point where you are comfortable socially, which may be where a lot of the listeners are, go ahead and start just creating these little sparks that allow someone to start a relationship, right? And they don't all have to lead to relationships, but you can certainly create this openness to that, and then people see how people respond.
Yeah, great advice. So what kind of feedback have you been getting regarding the book?
Yeah, I will say, like, one of my favorite things, I have a friend who runs a podcast, and I lived with him for a while, and one of my coolest things of watching him just day to day is people would walk up to him and say, like, they just start a conversation based on something he said on the most recent episode. And so one of my things that I love with the book is, let's say, like digital clones. Like there are versions of Mateo that are running out in the world and are impacting people. They're helping people understand how to have better relationships without me having to be there at the exact moment, because it allows me to help more people. And so one of my great joys is people will write me and say like, hey, my friend's going to their first ever conference, right? There's a chapter in the book on conferences, and it's like, I just bought them a copy of your book to go ahead and help them get ready. Or I had someone reach out to me recently and was like, so-and-so said your book was amazing. And I was like, great, like looking forward to hearing how you think of it. And he writes me back, he's like, this was super helpful. And now he's running a conference, right? And so I've talked in there about conferences, I've talked in there about dinners and like how to host. And it's like, my book probably played a small role in the conference he's hosting. He's an incredibly capable entrepreneur. But it's really, really cool to see people not only like enjoy the experience, but to really benefit from the experience. One of the ways that I measure good books is ideas per page. What is the number of quality ideas I can use in my life per page, right? And sometimes you read a book that is, one idea, and then it's like 30 pages of stories to emphasize that idea. And other times you read a book that's like, okay, one idea every second page, right? Yeah. One of those to me is going to be a lot more valuable because I'm learning, right? And my time is valuable. I think everyone's time is valuable. And so my book is one that they say nonfiction books are either incredibly entertaining or exceptionally practical and useful. And I was like, I don't know if I trust myself to be incredibly entertaining yet, but I want to be incredibly practical and useful. And so the book is very, very dense ideas per page. So that's the other thing that people comment on is they're like, whoa, I've not gotten like this much value out of the book in a long time.
Yeah. So my last question then, Mateo, is where can people buy the book and where can they find you?
Yeah. The book is on Amazon. So if you go on Amazon and look Beyond Networking, you look at my name, it should pop up. That's the best way to do it. If you want to find me, you can best find me at MateoMartez.com, literally my first name, last name.com. I'm on there. I have links to my LinkedIn and Twitter and whatnot, and you're welcome to reach out. I also have my email on there, my email's in the book. So I'd love to hear from people. Like I very much find that there's this writer, Matthew Dix, who I really like, who talks about how you need about a 6-to-1 positive to negative ratio for experiences. Like our brains are just wired to pay attention to the negative. And so he talks about how much he cherishes when a reader reaches out to him about one of his books. I feel very similar. I feel very honored whenever someone is like, oh, I used this thing and it helped me, or I really like this thing, I'm going to try it out. I love to hear about those things. So please, by all means, if you got excited about this conversation, if you read the book and you get excited about that, please shoot me an email. I would love to hear from you.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much. And I hope lots of my listeners will go and buy your book, and hopefully we can make you a bestseller.
Yeah, I'm trying to share the idea with as many people as possible. I think it makes life much richer and more enjoyable.
Yeah, thanks for being my guest today, Mateo.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liz. What a joy.
Thanks for listening to Small Business, Big Network. If you found this podcast useful, please do rate, review and subscribe. And don't forget to share it with the rest of your network too.